All right, well, welcome to the Secrets of the Pyramids Revealed workshop with myself and Robert Edward Grant, also known as Robert Grant. But we definitely are going to go ahead and get started now.
So the Great Pyramid. So let's get talking about the Great Pyramid. And, it's been kind of bizarre. I went to the Great Pyramid in 2017 with the Resonance Foundation, and I gave my first presentation there on my view of mathematics as a universal language of consciousness. And I fell in love with that place. Like, I've been back several times, and it has absolutely changed my life. First of all, I'd never presented to a large group before, so that was my first time to present any of my math work. I mean, obviously, I've been working in business for many, many years, and in the business context, I give presentations all the time. But I had never kind of presented anything on my math work, and I was shocked that at the end of a several-hour presentation, I thought everyone would be bored to tears, and actually half the room was absolutely in tears, but not because they were bored, thankfully. I think what I have kind of figured out, and I agree with Billy, we don't really discover anything, we just remember things. And as we remember things and we tap into our higher awareness, we can access this Akashic field, we can access a higher field of knowledge. And I think the Great Pyramid plays a very fundamental role in this. And I see the Great Pyramid as a device, not only for a Stargate for travel, which I've experienced myself, and I've not shared this with anybody before in any kind of public forum, so this is the first time I'm going to be talking about this. But in addition, I really see it as a tool for ascension for humanity. And I see it as a mirror of our own consciousness, that as we are able to tap into higher dimensions, we will tap in and be able to find new chambers, new things related to the Great Pyramid. And I've already experienced that several times myself. So let's get into this. So this is kind of what a trip with me is like, okay? This is not the normal trek into a structure. This is kind of like almost more like the Indiana Jones version of these things. And it's been a great pleasure to be able to access places that other people just have never accessed before, open archaeological dig sites, etc. And obviously, everyone has to be very careful not to do anything disrespectful in any way, to the structures as they're kind of being opened up. And the great thing about the places that you go into, and I have to say, I want to compliment the Egyptian government. A lot has been said about how, in Egypt, there's sort of this big sort of context of suppression around keeping things out of the public eye. Well, actually, my experience has been quite the opposite. I've been able to foster a really good relationship with the people in leadership positions in Egypt, and I enjoy that. And as such, I'm able to get access to things that probably other people have never gotten access to. And it was exactly 3 years ago this week that I discovered the Alpha Omega inside the Great Pyramid. It was kind of bizarre because the entire week before I was in Israel with a group of my friends, and I was drawing all week in my notebook an Alpha Omega. I kept drawing Alpha Omega, Alpha Omega. And then on the airplane even over, I was drawing sort of the geometric form of Alpha Omega. And you can see some of that in this picture on the right. And I had this feeling that there was going to be something fundamental about Alpha Omega. And when I got to the Great Pyramid, of course, knowing that there's never been any writing found, either in the King's Chamber or it's sort of purposely and very famously devoid of writing, I looked down and it was the most bizarre thing, because I have to say, right before I noticed the Alpha Omega, I remembered it. And again, I've not said this to anybody, so you guys are the first to hear this. I remembered the Alpha Omega being pressed into the rose granite when it was created, when it was done, and I was there. And so the moment that I remembered it, I looked down right on the spot that I had remembered it in, and there it was, in the exact same spot. And it was very difficult to just see it unless you kind of had it pointed out to you. So I can see why nobody saw it before. I can see, you can see that the Omega is quite difficult to see, but the alpha is quite clear. And it's just something that unless you look at it in a perfect light, you could easily miss it. And obviously it's very, very old. It has a very old patina on it. Now, Alpha Omega, you might say, well, those are Greek letters. I don't believe that they have their origin in Greece. I believe that they have their origin far, far, far before Greece, and that they are holdovers and carryovers from a very ancient language that we might refer to today as some form of Atlantean. So this is the king's chamber and the sarcophagus. So the sarcophagus is 89.62 inches in length, and it's 38.5 inches wide. And just as Billy said, it will fit exactly inside of the sarcophagus, the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant famously has, you know, the thick signs of the zodiac faces on each of the angels, right, that are on the cherubim that are on top of the Ark of the Covenant. And a lot of reason why people get this confused and think that the Ark of the Covenant would never fit inside the king's chamber sarcophagus is because you have to make the conversion to the biblical cubit, which is not the same length as the Royal Egyptian cubit. The Royal Egyptian cubit, in this case, is 1.718 feet, whereas the biblical cubit is more like around, and there are ranges of it as well, but it's more like in the range of about 1.5 feet. So this is a video that was made by Will Wire, who went to visit the King's Chamber after I had already posted on it and identified the Alpha Omega markings, and he wanted to see them for himself. So this was his experience. See it right there? This is just as if you were there. And you have to ask yourself, how could this have been missed for many, many, many years? And who knows exactly how many years? So this is the Alpha Omega. And you can see on top, you know, kind of without the framing, and this will help you see it. You can see it with the framing. And interestingly, the exact dimensions and proportions of the Alpha Omega are quite fascinating in and of themselves. So from the far side of the sarcophagus, or the one that's nearest to the Alpha Omega, that would be, as we're looking at it now, looking down at it, to the right, from the serif of the A, which is right kind of at that, close to the center of the Alpha Omega, it's exactly 31.4159 inches. And to the peak of the letter A, it is exactly 33 inches. So 33 and 31.4159 inches, those obviously are very, very important numbers, both of which we've already talked about on this program. That has a slope as well of the letter A of 56 degrees. And why is that important? And why is the 5.6 inches important? Well, because that's a reference as well to 31.4159, which would be pi times 10, because 5.605 inches squared, so it'd be 5.605 inches squared, turns out to be 31.4159 inches as well. And it also ties back to the room itself, because the room itself is exactly measured in meters. 31.4159 meters is the perimeter of the King's Chamber itself. So here we have the exact dimensions, and not only these dimensions, but many, many others, which you're about to see, that are tying right back to the construction of the pyramid itself. So, you know, what is the sarcophagus made out of? The pyramid sarcophagus is made out of rose granite, and it's a very special room because the speed of sound through air is 343 meters per second, but the speed of sound inside granite, so through granite, because sound seeks a dense medium for its wave propagation, is actually 6,000 meters per second. So it's a full 17 and a half times faster than the speed of sound through air. Now, interestingly, the symbol, of course, and if you look at kind of the gemstones for the month of May and late April of Taurus, is actually the emerald, right? The green stone. And I'm Taurus. It's my birthday next week. So, this is always kind of a special time for me. But the rose quartz is another very important aspect of this. And it also ties back to the name of the Giza Plateau, which the Giza Plateau was originally called the Ros Tau, right? The Rose Cross. Now, if you go on to Amoric, which is the Rosicrucian website, they claim as one of their original members and leaders was actually Leonardo da Vinci. So the granite out of which this chamber is constructed is an igneous rock containing silicon quartz crystals. This particular granite, which was brought from Aswan quarries, contains 55% or more quartz crystal. So this is really a crystal chamber. So now if we get deeper into the dimensions of this Alpha Omega, we're going to find some other numbers that are quite startling. So first of all, if you notice that we have 3.24 inches is exactly the width of the Alpha. And you might say, well, wait a minute, Robert, didn't they use the cubit? Well, just as we've heard, and as you're going to see in this presentation, the cubit, the meter, and the foot were all fundamental units of measure used to create and construct the Great Pyramid. So then you might ask, well, how is that possible? Because, how could it be if we didn't have the foot, and it wasn't the foot just like some guy's foot or a king's foot? And isn't that sort of an arbitrary unit of measure? And what I'm telling you right now is no, it is not an arbitrary unit of measure. And I can tell you very definitively so, but I'm going to leave it in this presentation. You'll see in just a moment. You'll see that the peak of the A is on the 33rd inch, and 31.4 inches is right at the edge of the serif. And then 30 inches, right at the center of the omega, which of course is 0.33 of the length of the sarcophagus. So you have this interesting symmetry, and 33 inches at the peak of the Alpha, but it's 0.33 of the length of the sarcophagus at the center and peak of the omega. And we have many mathematical constants that are embedded in this. In fact, we've now found that over 12 of the fundamental mathematical constants are embedded just in these two letters. So if this somehow was graffiti, whoever put it there was way more advanced in their knowledge. And at least they would have been at least advanced at the degree that the builders of the Great Pyramid were, because the same proportional dimensions are built into it. You can see phi, 1.62 inches for the width of the omega. And actually, if you look at the two legs coming off of the omega symbol, those two legs happen to center exactly at 222.5 degrees and 137.5 degrees. And why is that important? Well, because 137.5 is the golden angle, and 222.5 is phi, or 0.618 multiplied by 360 degrees. We also have Euler sitting inside here, because you'll notice as well that the length, right, at the 33rd inch, right, is 0.37, right, 0.37, and we multiply that by 3.7, and you end up with 1.37, right? Again, so 0.37 multiplied by 3.7 equals 1.37. Well, that's the fine structure constant as well, right? And then if we take 33 inches at the peak of the letter A, and we divide that by 89.62 inches, we have the Euler number. So wait a minute, we've got the Euler number, and then when you take 89.62 inches and divide it by pi, it comes out to the speed of light plus 1 in miles per second. I mean, this is kind of crazy. And the last video we had, when Billy was teaching us about Euler-Mascheroni constant, the Euler-Mascheroni constant is a little bit different from the Euler number. The Euler-Mascheroni constant comes out to be 0.5772, 156. And that 0.5772 shows up again in Euler plus 1. So 1.5772 is giving us this relationship of 89.62 inches versus 56.62 inches, which is the 33 inches removed, right? So the leftover part, or the dark part of the sarcophagus, comes out to be exactly the Euler-Mascheroni number. That's denoted by the letter Y that you can see, plus 1. That's kind of amazing. And 5.6 inches turns out, when divided into 89.62, turns out to be 0.062, again, a golden ratio. So it just seems highly, highly uncanny that this would all just be coincidence. So, but the real Da Vinci Code began for me with this drawing, because I was, my wife was pregnant, and it was the day that she was going to be due. And so I was waiting and she was sleeping. And so I started sketching in my notebook while she was sleeping and kind of going through early stages of her labor. And she had a very long labor. And I started sketching this drawing, and somehow, and I sketched it without having any picture in front of me or anything. I just kind of did it from memory. And somehow I immediately felt like the upper right corner, and it looks askew here. That's just because I didn't do it with a scanner. I took this picture when I drew the picture with my camera on my iPhone. In the upper right-hand corner, I noticed that if I drew a line directly from the center of the navel, right, and then marked where that showed up, and if 0 degrees was at the top of the circle, like on a clock, right, then that would end up being 51.843 degrees. And I just knew it. It was the weirdest thing. And then I also knew, I started drawing circles up his body, which I realized immediately it was marking chakras. And I recognized as well the locations of each of those chakral points were matching up with exactly where the chambers were showing up. So this was one of those moments where, I should not have been thinking about anything else other than I was going to have another baby, but my wife was going to have a baby. But I immediately started thinking about, okay, I got to get in touch with Alan Green, and we've got to start investigating this further, for sure. And sure enough, we did, right? And we found that, in fact, there is a direct correlation. Each of these horizontal lines had is matching up exactly with the floor level of each of the chambers, including the ground level. Then what about the lines here at the knees? And what about the lines here that's markedly higher than the old entrance, and as well the current entrance? What are these lines telling us, right? And wait a minute, how is it even possible that Da Vinci knew any of this stuff? And then, of course, you have to ask the question, what about this line here at the throat? What about the one at the eyebrow? And what about the one at the crown? So we actually went on a trip last year, right before COVID, so that we could chase down this mystery. And we knew already that there had been this pyramid scan project, that they had found a very large void space above the Grand Gallery that is about the same size as the Grand Gallery, and would potentially lead exactly to the throat chakra level of the Great Pyramid. Now, it just so happens that the first trip I had to Egypt, while we were there, is the day that they found, we saw when we were there in October, on October 5th and 6th of 2017, which happened to be around the exact same time that the massacre happened in Las Vegas in front of the fake pyramid, Luxor. So here we were, about almost 200 of us here, having this incredible experience inside the Great Pyramid. And, and then all the way around the other side of the earth, we had a horrific experience happening in Las Vegas. And so at the same time, though, we had heard that they had found some discovery using this muonic, scanning and ground penetrating radar type of technology. They found a very large void space above the Grand Gallery. And so I had to go back, right? I had to go back. And in 2018, I went and I discovered the Alpha Omega. And then I went back again in early 2020, just before COVID hit in a major way. And in fact, we barely made it back in time before they closed the borders. I think we had almost only one day to spare. Otherwise, we'd have been stuck in Egypt for quite some time. So then we had the question, though, before going to Egypt in 2020, well, we need some evidence that Da Vinci actually went to Egypt. And what we found is a reference in this book that I have, the Codex Atlantico. And the Codex Atlantico is a collection of the writings and notebook works of Leonardo da Vinci across science and art and mathematics, across virtually everything. And there are several codexes that Da Vinci kept, in fact, that have become books today. Codex Leicester, right, is one of them, and it happens to be owned by Bill Gates right now. But as you look in those letters, there's actually a letter to the Devatdar of Syria, and who is the Sultan of Cairo. Now, that's kind of interesting. The Sultan of Babylon, Cairo, but it specifically says that it's not a reference to the Babylon on the shores of the river Chober, right? And even today, Leonardo's work is perhaps the most famous historical cryptographer that ever existed, right? He encrypted virtually everything. And I'm not going to have it be the subject of the discussion today, but one of the things you're going to see on the Last Supper is that the face of Peter, and I've not talked about this before, the face of Peter is actually the face, Peter the Apostle is actually the face of Leonardo himself. Now, why would Leonardo paint himself into the Last Supper? And why would he paint himself as Peter? And why is he holding a knife behind his back? And why does he have his hand down Mary Magdalene's blouse? So during the missing years of Da Vinci's life, which are pretty well known to be approximately 1482 to 1486, there's no reference to Da Vinci. He's a very famous guy at all, pretty much at all points in his life. Even from the time he was a young man, everyone knew who Da Vinci was. People were always interested to know what he was doing and where he was going, and what were the projects that he was working on. But Da Vinci gives us an account in the Codex Atlantico of his travels to Egypt, secret travels to Egypt, working as an engineer of the Mamluk Sultan Kate Bey. Now, Kate Bey is a very famous Mamluk Sultan, and Mamluk actually is a reference to bodyguard. So there was a bodyguard, as the Ottoman Empire was up and running, there was this other group of people that were kind of controlling Syria all the way down to Egypt, and these were known as the bodyguard, sort of the bodyguard sultans, the Mamluk sultans. And so basically what Da Vinci says in this book, and in this letter specifically, that was a draft letter, and it was not written in the normal backwards mirrored text as he normally does. And that's usually a tell for Da Vinci. Whenever he writes in a normal way, it usually means it's an encryption. And we found several like that. So basically, and you can find all of these references also just simply on Wikipedia. So if you just look it up, you'll be able to find it. So he says, "At last we reached Babylon, but this is not that Babylon which stood on the further shore of the river Chober, but that which is called the Egyptian Babylon. It is close to Cairo, and the twain are but one and not two towns." And then he goes on to talk about he's talking about it as if it's during his travels, but he references these mountains as the Taurus Mountains that he's also inspecting. And he goes into great detail about Mount Taurus in particular. "These peaks are of such a height that they seem to touch the sky, and in all the world there is no part of the earth higher than its summit, and the rays of the sun always fall upon it on its east side for 4 hours before daytime, and being of the whitest stone." So it's an equal part, on one side of the pyramid versus the other as the sun is going over it, right? That's one of the characteristics of the Great Pyramid, because it's pointing due north. "The Taurus Mountains consist in great part of limestone. It shines resplendently and fulfills the function to these." Well, the casing stones of the Great Pyramid are, of course, limestone. So what is Da Vinci trying to tell us? And Muhammad Ibrahim, who I work very closely with, and we're going to write a book together on all of this, before you even went to Egypt on this last trip, told me, he said, "Look, the ancient symbol for the Great Pyramid is the chevrons, these two chevrons that represent the entrance of the Great Pyramid, and this bull, the Apis bull. And so they often refer to it as Bull Mountain. And here's the reference in the Codex Atlantico, 1336 and 1337. Then he goes even further and he says, and the great and dark cavern within. So he actually goes in and chronicles, and most of the people believe that he's talking about the Taurus Mountains that are kind of on the border of Turkey and Armenia. And he says here, I came to the entrance of a great cavern, in front of which I stood some time, astonished and unaware of such a thing. Bending my back into an arch, I rested my left hand on my knee and held my right hand over my downcast and contracted eyebrows, often bending first one way and then the other to see whether I could discover anything inside. And this being forbidden by the deep darkness within. And after having remained there some time, two contrary emotions arose within me, fear and desire, fear of the threatening dark cavern and desire to see whether there was any marvelous thing within it. Well, you could look at this as he's talking about some mountain called Taurus Mountain, or you could look at it as he's talking about the Rostau Pyramid and the cavern within, the very large cavern within. And of course, he's writing to the Sultan of Cairo in this letter, the Devatdar, who reports to the Sultan. So basically one of the things that I had done in 2018 is I measured the room. I wanted to measure the room because I had the appropriate measurement materials to be able to do it, laser technology and such. And Alan Green and I had contacted just before that time. And he said, look, could you do me a favor and do some measurements if you can while you're in there? I said, sure. So while I was there, I measured the King's Chamber room. And it turns out that, of course, it's, as we know, it's 20 cubits in length and it's 10 cubits in width. And then it is 19.1 feet from floor to ceiling. And then, of course, you can see the 89.62 on the sarcophagus, and you can see the sarcophagus dimensions. Well, this is the most studied room on the planet. And there is a 3-4-5 triangle that is embedded from the upper corner down to the opposite side corner, forming a 3-4-5 triangle exactly when you form that diagonal. But what I also noticed is that what Alan had said was true. Alan told me, he said, look, I believe, I have a thesis that the sarcophagus will fit volumetrically into the King's Chamber exactly 137.5 times. And I said, well, that's kind of amazing. And so that would mean for it to do that, you turn the sarcophagus on its side, and it could be stacked 6 times to the ceiling and 5 times across the floor. So there's 5, 6 again, just like the bent pyramid. And when you actually add it all up, it turns out he's right, that the sarcophagus will fit in the room of the King's Chamber exactly 137.5 times. And the half difference is the space inside the sarcophagus. And if you remove that, it ends up being exactly 137.036 times. Now, Queen Elizabeth. Now let's jump forward to the Shakespearean era. And Queen Elizabeth I, who is, kind of revered as, one of the greatest monarchs of all time for the United Kingdom. And was there potentially a connection between Queen Elizabeth I and this Rosicrucian movement? Well, many believe that Sir Francis Bacon, one of her lovers, Edward de Vere, as well as several others like John Dee, who was her mathematician and magician, astrologer, and polymath of the day, all are believed to have been Rosicrucian members of the Rosicrucian movement. Now, interestingly, this particular painting was for so long believed, obviously known to be a Da Vinci, but believed to be from a much earlier period in time. When now, however, there have been many recent questions come up about the timing of this particular painting. It might actually be one of the later paintings of Da Vinci. And it's potentially believed to actually be a portrait of Anne Boleyn. Now, wait a minute. Why would Da Vinci have ever met Anne Boleyn? Well, she lived in the same house that Leonardo lived in for the last few years of his life. She was like a bridesmaid, or maid of honor in the court of King Francis, who was a cousin of Henry VIII. And so this also happens to be the mother of Queen Elizabeth I, the mother of Elizabeth I, who of course was very closely connected with Edward de Vere, who many believe to be the real Shakespeare, or one of a few people that would have posed as Shakespeare as a pen name, which we found many, particularly Alan Green has found many encryptions related to that. Now, one of the things I was noticing as I was on my trip flying over to Egypt and I was looking at this particular painting, I noticed something was popping out around her head in the painting, and I could see a face very clearly and what looked to be an eye of Horus around her head, even to the point where the iris of the eye of Horus would be the light shining on her head, on her hair line. You can also see an upside down T, of course, with the part in her hair. And that is kind of interesting as well, because the inverted Tau cross is a symbol of not only Peter, the apostle, but also it's a symbol across Rosicrucianism as being a final step, a critical step to achieve balance for mankind. Now, interestingly, that Anne Boleyn's name is Bullen. Her name actually means Bullen. And interestingly as well, Edward de Vere, who would have been the lover of Queen Elizabeth I, is the 17th Earl of Oxford. Oxford, of course, means bull crossing. So can you see anything behind Anne Boleyn's head? Well, I do, and I almost see what looks like a Leonardo, a lion man. And you can only see half of his face because you can see his nose. And maybe I'll show this. I've got a cursor here. This is the nose. These are the nostrils. It even has a tongue sticking out like cats often do. And then it has a large cat eye here. This is the iris of the eye. And you can even see a medulla oblongata coming up here to match up with the eye of Horus, right? So that was kind of astounding for us because, we were not expecting to see that possibly all of Da Vinci's paintings after going to Egypt, and I got a mistake here, am I going correct? All of Da Vinci's paintings after he went to Egypt might actually be connected with some form of master encryption. But what about the Last Supper? Well, if you've seen the Da Vinci Code, you would know that, of course, this triangle that's upside down, in between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, is, of course, very emblematic of this particular interpretation. Well, it turns out that that's not just any triangle. It happens to be exactly the Great Pyramid's slope angle of 51.84 degrees. Now, we can also see Peter, and Peter is holding a knife. This is Mary Magdalene. And if you look closely, you'll even see an omega symbol in her garment right here. The shape of an omega. It looks like a Lululemon symbol. And then you've got a knife being held behind his back by Peter. Now, this isn't Peter's face, though, because Peter was only the same age as Jesus. Jesus was 33 when this was supposed to have happened. Why does this guy look much older? Looks like he's in his late 40s or early 50s. And if you look closely at his face matches the face of Leonardo da Vinci. And why does Peter have his hand down Mary Magdalene's blouse here? And why does it look like they're almost conspiring? And we have here Judas holding a bag of silver. And then you've got these apostles looking down saying, I don't want to have anything to do with this. And Jesus has his right hand pointed down, which usually means justice, and the left hand pointed up, which means mercy. And of course, this is the famous scene that he says, someone in here has betrayed me. So that's the subject of another presentation. But what is this thing right underneath where Jesus is? And clearly Jesus is the shape of the letter A also. And we've got this omega that's sitting inside of the shadows or the ripples of the outer garment of Mary Magdalene. What is this thing? Well, in 1652, a portal doorway was purportedly cut through the Milan fresco as the painter was unrecognizable, which to me sounds absolutely ridiculous. Everyone knew Leonardo when he was alive. They would not have cut this door at the time, far, far after, into a masterpiece work by Leonardo da Vinci. But that's what is claimed. The Last Supper was, of course, famously encrypted. And how much more could yet be revealed related to this? So you can see here, again, you can see the omega symbol, the faint outline of omega symbol. We've got Jesus, who is the shape of the letter A. And where they're crossing over happens to be the exact proportions of the phi ratio. So you can see it here. Interesting. But one other thing started to really stick out to me, because as I was standing inside the king's chamber, I noticed that something else was going on, because the room looked awfully similar to the room of the Last Supper. Like, what is going on here? Is it possible that Da Vinci modeled the proportions of how the room was situated along with the king's chamber somehow? So I overlaid the picture of the Last Supper on top of the king's chamber, and look what I got. Now, if you move the original position of the sarcophagus to its original position, because we know it had been moved and we know where the original position would have been, it's exactly framed by that portal door that is in Milan, immediately underneath the fresco. And you can see that the floor dimensions are matching up almost perfectly. And this picture was not taken with the intent that it was going to be trying to be matched up against the ceiling line inside the king's chamber, which is what we did here. We matched the ceiling line up so that we could actually see how it would work proportionally. It turns out it does. So here we have 5184 as the slope angle. Is this again pointing us to the Great Pyramid, just like the Vitruvian Man does at 5184? Also, turns out exactly where Jesus is sitting, right next to Mary Magdalene, is the exact same spot of where the Alpha Omega is on the side they're sitting at, if you're looking at the room as if it's the king's chamber. So right at that center point is where the Alpha Omega exist. So of course, it's pointing the opposite direction, the same way that you would see it on the bottom, right, of the original position of the sarcophagus. I also noticed some other things. In the pediment directly above the window, it looked like there was something written. And I could see an R, a letter R, and an E, and also what looks like, something next to it, which is a gamma, right? You can see an R, an E, a gamma, and then some other letter, which is hard to make out beneath it, right? It might actually be a G. Now this, if it is an REG, it could reference the following things. One is Re. Re is the name of Ra. It's most commonly spelled R-E. Ra is the sun god, right, in the Egyptian pantheon. Reg, if this is a G at the bottom, so you can see the R here and a very clear E, and then what looks like a capital G here. Reg means king. It means king, just as you would remember from Bible studies that Rex also is a reference to king. But you'll also notice that there seems to be an I inside the pediment. And if I were to get rid of this circle, then you might notice that there's a slit here where an eye would be. It looks like a cat eye. You can even notice eyelashes coming off of this eye. So that's kind of interesting too. Something that demands more attention, right? And here's another view, R-E-G. What does re mean in Italian? It means king as well. And reg also means king. It's the word that regulations come from. So is there some other message that's being told to us here about the importance of this? And then also, is this not potentially a pediment that is representation of the Eye of Ra above the sun? Not only the S-U-N for Ra, but also the Son of God. Then the left eye of Horus, is that not potentially sitting, which represents the moon, sometimes referred to as the Eye of Thoth, right on top of Anne Boleyn's head, right here. And it looks as if there's sort of a lion face with a nostril here and a nostril here. And you can even kind of see a tongue sticking out, and Thomas pointing his finger up as well. Looks like a Leonardo, a lion man. Now, what's the representation of the Eye of Ra and the Eye of Thoth? Or why would it be called the Eye of Thoth instead of the Eye of Horus? Well, because both eyes were the eyes of Horus. Horus was the person this happened to, right? He got his left eye plucked out. The Eye of Ra represents the right sight, sun-related masculine yang energy, explores reason, math, logic, science, language, a symbol of good luck and creative action. Whereas the Eye of Thoth, and the reason it's often given the name Eye of Thoth is because it's Thoth who used his magician's powers to restore the left eye of Horus to its ability to be able to be used again. And so the left eye represents the moon. It's feminine, yin energy, explores human nature, sexual energy, intuition, and magic. But what else? There seem to be a lot of other things hidden on that back wall. Well, there's a lantern, right? Which you probably remember, the virgins are supposed to keep their lanterns ready with oil from the Bible. But it looks like there's a lot of script writing up on the back side of the wall. And then you can even see down here what looks to be a faint outline of another letter A right here. And as you look closer and closer, you'll find other things that also look as though there's sort of a lion's profile inside of here. So this would be a mane, right? And then this would come down to its nose. So we started studying and analyzing this really, really closely with as high res photography as we possibly could. So what else did we notice? We also noticed numbers written above the tapestries. And these numbers are 246, 246. And then this writing here is Hebrew, which one of the people on our trip with us told us that it was one of the names of God written in Hebrew above this particular tapestry. And this was kind of an amazing moment because we had this up on a screen and everyone started walking up to the screen and they could all see new things that we'd never seen before. It was the most bizarre moment I think I'd ever experienced. Like all of a sudden, many, many new things came out of this particular painting as if in real time. So here's the 246. And the 246 is very important because 624, 426 is the fundamental sort of thesis of all of the Shakespeare-related encryptions. The King's Chamber. So what else could we find on the walls of the King's Chamber? The Eye of Ra in the same position, potentially on the back wall of the King's Chamber. Well, in the exact same position, you notice there looks to be something that was there. You can kind of see that Egyptian, inner eye, part of the eye, and then follow it along here. You can see what looks to be like an eyelid right along here. And of course, this is very old. It may have been scrubbed off, but you can also see what looks to be the center of an iris and almost like a yin yang symbol on top of it. So, and it's not as clear as you can see this down here, but you can see a faint outline of it right here. And interestingly, it follows through the next block right along here. And you can see how it's thicker right here, just like it as you would imagine an eye to be. Here's another view of it right here. Is this potentially the Eye of Ra, the remnants of an Eye of Ra that was on the exact same spot as the one in the Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci? Well, what about this? We notice that in the Last Supper painting, there appears to be in script writing a letter A, a Q, and a W. A W lowercase, of course, is an omega. Alpha, Chi, Omega. And here's a larger form of it. You can see it hidden in the tapestry, Alpha, Chi, Omega. So that was kind of weird also because it's matching up with the Alpha, Omega on exactly the same position where Jesus and Mary Magdalene are. Now, this is my wife laying in the sarcophagus. And I will say that there's something very special because once you find the right resonance frequency in the sarcophagus, then the chamber starts to resonate at a very loud pitch. It goes wah, 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 like it's an engine that's just been turned on. I did this. I've spent 5 nights in the Great Pyramid. I've laid in the sarcophagus for a total of about 9 hours. And I can tell you that this is a portal device without any doubt. And if you're able to match the right frequency and you have the right intention in your heart, you can experience what I experienced, which is not something that I talk about. But I can tell you that eventually many, many people in the world will have this experience that I've had. And it completely changed my life. I did not stay inside. I mean, my physical body did. And your body goes through this autonomic kind of response where it can breathe without you thinking about it. And you continue to make a sound like a mooing cow. You just start breathing, you breathe in, and the chamber continues to resonate between your breaths. So you breathe in, and it's still resonating from the last Om chant you were doing, and you just go, mm. You don't even have to open your mouth. It's almost just like an M sound, mm, just like that. And it's right on 171 hertz. So this is my wife, and I was pointing out to her where the Alpha Omega is. I was showing her, and we were finding other things. The sarcophagus is literally covered with writing and design. And I believe that as we enter into higher awareness and understanding and dimensionality, that every time we go into the King's Chamber and to the pyramid, we will start to be able to see more and more of what is there. In fact, I had a dream about this just last night where I walked into the King's Chamber in my dream, and the walls were covered in color and writing that I had never, of course, seen before because they're very drab and dull looking. But there's possibility that there is a lot more embedded in it in higher dimension. And it's not a function of what the wall is, it's a function of our own perception and ascension. So this is me inspecting the sarcophagus. That's Alan Green. Now, getting access to the pyramid, it's not like you can find it on Airbnb. So you have to kind of know the right way to get into the pyramid and experience it. And you'll be able to see things like this. This is another new discovery that was found that night.
So go back to the center. Okay, so Zach, you see this? So go back to the center. Okay, so Zach, you see this? There's a center right here. And move that light around like you were. See it? It's like a radial circle.
See the radiating?
At the bottom, there's 2 pieces there. Right? You see it clearly? Okay. Different shadows so that down and look like this.
You can see even straight lines on it too.
See it? Wow.
And that is Zach Ibrahim, who is also a very famous Egyptologist. And this is right next to that broken part of the sarcophagus on the left side, if you're looking at the at it from the back wall of the King's Chamber. Here's another one. Whoops.
down slowly to circle the see radiant nature of what symbol is. See it? See it? Two branches right here, like a compass.
I see it.
New discovery, boys and girls. Look at this. Hey guys, Jamie, check this out. Come over. Look at this. So right in the center here, you see my finger?
Much easier to see on the
It's easier
camera.
to see on the camera. So move the thing in a circle like we're doing. So this is the center. This is there's a radius and another radius. Basically, it's radiating out from the center. And then you see it, it's got like this large circle here. It goes all the way around it. You can really see it on the video. And then there's like two things that come off of it, like a compass. Yeah, there's something that goes up around this as well. But like, step back a little bit, step back a little bit. Keep that light on, the red light on it. Okay. Now, it's definitely there. Look at that. Look at that.
Wow.
Look at that. Hey guys, come here. Don't come behind me. Yeah, hold it, come behind me. And you can see it. Let's look at my screen. Yeah. Right? Mohammed, is Mohammed here?
No.
Zach, can you come here?
So then we go, and I'm so busy looking at the sarcophagus that that my wife comes over to me and she says, "Hey, I think I found something on the wall over here also." And I said, "What do you see?" She goes, "I see a bull. I see a cow on the wall right here, just like a cave painting in France. And what looks to be some sort of heart structure right here. And even a larger cow with an eye right here and its horns here. And the neck of the cow, larger cow. So there's something with a bull kind of inside of a cow. So a smaller bull inside of a female cow. And here's another view of it right here. You can trace the line of it and the leg, back legs, front legs, a heart or something here. It looks like a heart because it comes all the way down here, but it doesn't seem to have a dip right at the center of there, but it looks like a heart nonetheless. And then you could see the cow and its eye right here and its horns and the horns of the bull right here. And from the side, it looks like this, as if it's been somehow burned or something. I don't know what would have been used to make this, but you can see the horns here. Here's the larger cow's face. Here's the eye again, and here's the face of the bull and that heart thing. It looks like there's something written on top of it as well. And if you're in the pyramid, you can see this as well. There's some form of writing that's coming across here. Of course, none of this has ever been recorded before.
Covering. Go ahead. Well, we just found something else here in the cage chamber. Wow. I'm blown away.
And you can see writing along the top. There's some form of writing that's no longer really easily visible, but the face of the cow. Here's the bull, excuse me. Here are the horns, right? And again, this picture, you can kind of see where there was some writing, and the writing looks to be, and it goes, frankly, all the way up the wall. it looks to be some large writing that looks very similar to Urdu, Sanskrit. And one of the people that I know is able to read Urdu and Sanskrit, and they said it looks a lot like a saying that is Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. And that is like, may all sentient beings, find love and happiness in the world. And it's who knows? We don't know exactly what it says. All we do know is that there is a bull here, and the archaeologist and Egyptology community is highly interested in this now, but it's been here all along, but we could only see it now. I've been in the King's Chamber so many times and always missed an 8.5 foot wide bull cow on the wall. And remember, Leonardo referred to it as Taurus Mountain. Rostau is just Taurus backwards. So there's another view of it, and it looks very similar to the cave paintings in France. The Apis bull and the Hathor. Those are the veritable personification of Alpha Omega. So tying right back to the rim of the sarcophagus. Now we're talking about structures here that are at least 13,000 years old, in my opinion. And so with an age of this degree, you can imagine how much wear and tear, erosion the room has taken, and who knows how much has been scrubbed off the walls. But where do these letters of Alpha Omega even come from in the first place? Well, of course, Alpha means bull, right? It means ox. Aleph is the word for bull, ox, and it's the first letter of the alphabet, not only of Hebrew, but also of Arabic. And this was a letter that has been around for a really long time and references, of course, the Taurus constellation. Now, the Ka also is the ancient word for the word cow. So we talk about the Merkaba, the Ka is a reference again to the cow. So another thing that's interesting is that there's the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet is Tav, it's the Tau. It's the letter T, it's not Omega. In Greek, it's Omega. So Aleph Tav means Alpha Omega in Hebrew. So A and T, the letter T. So again, the fourth Tau, or the inverted Tau cross. Now, what's also interesting is the letter M in Phoenician looks not too dissimilar from our letter M today. But if you look at Egyptian, you'd also recognize that. That's called Mem. And in Hebrew, looks more like a box or a square. And it actually matches the same symbology of Korean language. Korean is the language that I speak. And I recognized it, and it's the same sound, M. And so when a golem is made, which is a clay man, a name is placed at the top, which is Emet, which is Aleph, Mem, Tav. So Alpha, Mem, and Mem means water, Omega, on top of the head of a golem, which is this ancient rite that was performed by a Kabbalistic Jewish priest when they were going through their ascension process. And so basically they would stamp Aleph, Mem, Tav on top of the head, which interestingly is pronounced Emet, Emet. Well, in English, Emet is time backwards, which I find quite interesting. Like emit. So the Apis bull, the story of the Apis bull is one of sacrifice, death, and resurrection. In ancient Egyptian religion, the Apis is a bull that had to sacrifice himself to merge back into his mother. It's the ultimate sacrifice. And that representation also is directly connected to Osiris and the resurrection of Osiris. Now, we also have the symbol for Mercury and Thoth, which really is the Venus symbol, which rules the Taurus. Venus rules Taurus. So if you try to find the beginnings of astrology, good luck, because we don't know where astrology began. The earliest references go all the way back to the earliest writings. They go all the way back to the Epic of Gilgamesh and possibly even to Göbekli Tepe. So more like 12,000 years ago. So you've got the Aleph and Omega. These are symbols that have been used in Egypt since the very, very beginning, well before potentially even hieroglyphics. It's possible that there was a proto-language that was that these letters were loaned from, right? Thousands and thousands of years ago. So the ancient name of the Giza Plateau we already know is Ras Tau. Isn't that Tauros, the Greek word for Taurus or bull, in mirror image text? And yes, it is. So what about the King's Chamber? Is there an Apis, Hathor, bull, cow in the fresco on the wall? Well, turns out there is. You'll see here the horns in the exact same place on the wall of the King's Chamber. There is a cow right here that is stamped with Alpha QW, Alpha Chi Omega. And you can see its eye right here, right? And coming down and its body. And then there's another face that you could see a closer view of right here. And basically you could see the outline of the cow. You can see the horns here. And this, of course, this is not meant to be seen. It's an encryption, right? It's meant to be difficult to see. You can only see it with 5D eyes. So you can see here this line that is the ridge of the back of the mother cow and the Alpha QW. And you can also see right here what looks to be this symbol of a Taurus, right on here as well, and the face of a bull that is underneath it, right? So you can see one of his eyes right here, the other eye right here, the Taurus symbol right here, right? And its nose and snout right here, the Alpha Chi Omega, the Apis and Hathor. So not only is it matching what we're seeing in the Last Supper, but it's also matching the mythology associated with the Great Pyramid. And this happens to be on the north wall of the King's Chamber, which is also the Taurus side or the bull side at the entrance, right? Because that's the chevrons. It's the same side as the entrance is for the Great Pyramid. So here's another view of it. Again, you can see it in the exact same position on the wall. Then we also noticed on the backside of the sarcophagus what looks to be an absolute flower of life with its center right here and petals coming off of it right here, and a circle. Looks to be a perfect circle, and right above it is also the letter T right here, Tau, which is also another symbol for cow. So in all, these are the things that we found inside the King's Chamber. The bull and the cow on the wall. This is the entryway into the King's Chamber. And we found an eye of Ra on the back wall in the same place as the Last Supper. We found an eye of Horus and an eye of Ra also on the front side of the sarcophagus. Then what looks to be a dodecahedron and a more elaborate structure around it with a compass coming off of it here. We found a compass on the backside as well of the sarcophagus, and you can see where the sort of the stone is chipped here or broke off, and there are many different stories I won't go into about that. There's also what looks to be another flower of life on the wall here. So I just can't help but wonder the next time we go, what else we're going to find. The heart brain, and all the references as well to 7920. And that's a reference to Gaia. It represents the balance of masculine and feminine on Earth. So then I took it to 3D analysis because I wanted to see what relationships I could find in the third dimension. And of course, in the fourth dimension, which I've not shown this to anyone yet. But interestingly, when I did it in the fourth dimension, and this is the exact calculation you have to do to get a fourth dimensional measure, I found it quite fascinating that the volume in the fourth dimension of the hyperspirit, that is exactly the radius of 432, comes out to be a very, very close number to the Royal Egyptian cubit. That's for a hypersphere. And the hypercube, right, is coming out to this value here, which is really just S to the fourth power, right? So 7.071. And then when we go to the fifth dimension, this is really fascinating. This is the fifth dimensional measure using a 4.32 time hypersphere that goes both forward and backwards. It's 8/15 times pi to the 2r to the fifth power. So basically, strangely, it comes out exactly to the exact diameter of Earth in miles, 7920. How could that be? And you see this very interesting hypercube of time that's giving us a 24 and 42 relationship over here through its reciprocal values. So the volumetric in the fifth dimension using the Da Vinci radius of 432 gives me Earth, the Earth diameter in miles. So what else has he left us? Well, he left us some stuff here related to Salvator Mundi. And notice, this is another painting that he did after his time in Egypt. And the right side of his face is darker than the left, or rather our right, so it would be his left face. So I did a mirror match on both sides, masculine and feminine. And you'll notice that the curls look a lot more pronounced on the right image of the Omega. He's also holding two balls over his breast, so clearly Leonardo might have been a joker. And the neck is markedly thinner. He looks like he might have a bit of a beard because it's just darker. But if you look away from the light, you'll notice that the eyes look significantly more feminine on the right side than they do on the left side, our left. So when you combine them, what you really see is mainly the masculine because that's where all the light is. And when I looked at the hand gestures, I noticed that, geez, that's kind of the shape of an Alpha Omega. And he's already got the Chi right in the middle of his chest. So Alpha Chi Omega. Again, is Leonardo trying to push us again back to this Apis, Osiris story, Hathor, Isis? And look, there's number 8s all over the X, which is also very interesting. What's the 8 mean? Well, 888 means light, consciousness. This has been angel numbers for a very long time. Christ consciousness, divine balance. Alpha Chi Omega and 888, Christ consciousness. Is Da Vinci trying to tell us something, again, about finding our Christ consciousness and our balance at the Great Pyramid? Now let's take a closer look at the orb. So I drew that together to see the right triangle coming out. And this was actually the beginning of all my work in right triangles, I have to say. And I wanted to see, gee, maybe there's some relationship with Leonardo constellation. By the way, I totally agree that, and so does Larry Paul, that pretty much the entirety of Egypt is a giant star map. So the Leo constellation, the Leonardo, the Lion Man, is interesting because it has Alpha Regulus as one of its stars, Alpha Regulus, and it also has Omega Leonis, right? So there's Alpha Regulus Leonis, or Alpha Leonis, sometimes it's referred to, and Omega Leonis. It's the only constellation that has this kind of combination. So you got Alpha Leonis and Omega Leonis, and it's not very far away. But let's take a closer look at the orb again. Is this somehow matching up with the stars of Leo? Well, it turns out that it does match up and represents a possible connection to the Great Sphinx. Are the stars of the Leo constellation possibly pointing to the Sphinx, or perhaps something under it? And these stars are matching. When I showed this also to to Muhammad, Ibrahim, he immediately said, every place where those markings are, where you've got a zeta, a mu, and an epsilon, is where tomb robbers have tried to get in, as if they knew something. That's why the nose was purportedly broken off. It was an attempt to get into the Sphinx. Now, everything, of course, what I just showed you was the mirror imaged. So if we looked at the unmirrored image, it would actually be that the omega is right on the left paw. And you've got an X that would be right where the notch of the Coeur de Lion is. So is there potentially something positioned under the left paw or under the X? So I had a chance to go to the Great Sphinx, and I was lucky enough to be there, all hours of the night, and I was able to go under the Sphinx. So this is what I like to call the Sphinxter. It's on the backside of the. That was a joke, by the way, but I couldn't hear anyone laugh. So this is on the backside of the Great Sphinx, and there's a crawl passage that you can go in, and it's very difficult to get inside there and to get permission to do so. And I've not shared this photo anywhere, but you're the first to see this. So I went in and immediately saw a barricade under the Sphinx. And no one, again, has seen these photos before. This barricade is something that I could have crossed over, and I could see above it and I could see beyond it. There were more barricades, and I was unable to get over them without having to really, move some stuff around, which I didn't feel I had the right to do. But this is a way to get into the Sphinx and under the Sphinx, for sure. I actually was able to go inside with Jamie Janover. So he and I did it together, and he's the one who manages my social media accounts and such. So we got to take a picture under the Sphinx, which was pretty cool. But let's talk about these stars again and fourfold mirror symmetry. Now, Da Vinci liked to use fourfold mirror symmetry because that's what trigonometry does. Trigonometry always takes right triangles and forms them in mirror symmetry 4 ways, or called quaternity or quaternion symmetry. One plane is real and 3 quadrants would be imaginary because they include negative numbers. So if we merge all of these together into one, this is what we get. That looks familiar, doesn't it? It looks like a Templar cross, but it also is exactly the match of the Great Pyramid. And the crown, from where those corners of the right triangle basically create, looks like ears or something on a cat, is landing exactly at the tips of the moon. Very interesting. Again, another perfect 5184 match. So what else? Well, the raiment of the X also matches the complementary angle of the Great Pyramid, which is the Eris edge. The Eris edge is 41.843 degrees, and it's a perfect match. When you want to climb the pyramid, if they let you, because they don't let people do that anymore, you have to climb it on the edges because that's where it's the least steep. And what's also interesting is if you look at the 5184 from the Vitruvian Man, you have the opposite of that would be 90 degrees minus 5184 is 38.158 degrees. So you've got 38.157, degrees. And if you take 180 degrees minus 138.157, it gives you perfectly the Eris edge as well. So it's kind of fascinating that now in 3 paintings, the Last Supper, we find that exact same angle of 5184. We find it in the Vitruvian Man. And now we can even connect to the Eris edge angle of 41.843 degrees. And it's right embedded into the X, the chi. Now, interestingly, we already heard this from Billy, but the speed of light is 299,792 and 458 meters per second exactly. Well, it turns out is that also matches the Great Pyramid, but not only does it match there, the east measure, or the longitude, this is the latitudinal reference. If we look at the longitudinal reference, it also matches something very important. And we heard about it when Billy gave his talk, but I'm going to tell you something entirely different about it in just a moment. So again, here's the Eris edge, here's the slope, right? Here's the Vitruvian man. And now you've got it in 3 paintings pointing directly to the Great Pyramid. Now let's pull on this thread a little further. I've measured all of the math constants, and so has my colleague, Alan Green. And there's a great video that I'm not going to show today that Alan did, which shows you unequivocally that all the measurement systems are embedded in the Great Pyramid. And it also shows you unequivocally that all of the mathematical constants are relational to one another, that all of them are dimensionless, in fact. They're all dimensionless. Alpha, 137, that is a dimensionless number, and so is pi. And I said already that 432 and alpha were directly related through 137.5. So all major math constants, and by the way, we found more than 80 math constants almost to absolute perfection embedded into the proportional dimensions of the Great Pyramid. Now, speed of light is 29.9720458. There's an O in there that shouldn't be there. Times 10 to the 7th power. But if you take the other longitudinal reference, it's 31.1342 degrees. Now, when you take that reference and divide it by 360, you end up with 0.0864. So again, 86,400. That's kind of incredible. That's the number of seconds in a day. So gravity and time are related. You add the 1 in front and you have light. Interesting. So the latitude, longitude matching, and you could look this up yourself. And people like to say, oh, it's not true. It's not true. I'm sorry, but it is. I got into a big argument with someone. I wasn't arguing with this guy. Was like, I'm an architect. I'm an expert on this stuff. And I said, you know what? The number you put on there is actually correct. You just did minutes and seconds, not the decimal conversion. Try it again with the decimal conversion. Then he ghosted because he found that it was exactly right. It is right. Do it yourself on Google Earth. And what's it trying to show us? It's trying to show us this relationship between Euler and pi. And Euler and pi have this very unique combination because Euler multiplied by 1/3 plus pi multiplied by 2/3 equals 3.000. These are boundary conditions on the number 3. And if you look at the speed of light that Albert Einstein always referred to, it was always referenced as 3 times 10 to the 8th power. He didn't like to say 299792458. He just said 3. So what about this amber colored ringsel stone over the heart? What does this mean? Well, in Buddhism, we cremate the death body, and as such, we are left with nothing as the bodies are burned and the ashes are thrown into the river. However, it's a different story for highly acclaimed Buddhist monks. When their death bodies are burnt, one can retrieve some remains from the ashes. These are tiny pearl-like objects known as ringsel stones. And these crystalline beads that look amber in color are said to be formed when a Buddhist master is cremated. It is said that the beads settle into the shape of a heart, conch flower, or other object. When I went to visit the Dalai Lama, I saw the jars of ringsel stones of former lamas. They actually keep them exactly in those jars like you see above. So is this perhaps the philosopher's stone in alchemy? For centuries, the philosopher's stone, which according to legends and myths can work wonders, was sought after by ancient alchemists. Hundreds of works have been written, but still remains unclear. What exactly is the philosopher's stone? It is our heart. In their writings, the alchemists used a multitude of allegories, metaphors, and symbols that only the initiated could correctly decode. So, for example, one of the recipes, right, says, take the mercury of, and it kind of goes on. But then it says, thus, it is precisely in a pure heart that a philosopher's stone is formed. which has alchemical properties. Using its power, people can become creators such as Jesus Christ, the legendary Count of Saint Germain, and the world-famous Helena Blavatsky, who could materialize objects out of thin air or transform one into another. This is the Ringsel stone. And the weight of the Ringsel stone was recorded and measured, of course, and this is where the term weighing of the heart came from. And the philosopher's stone that you can see in that image in the upper right is often showing a triangle, a circle, and a square. Now, it was only about a week and a half after my trip to Egypt when I discovered the Alpha Omega that I discovered the prime number pattern, that I could predict primes infinitely. Well, interestingly, it wasn't until much, much after that that I realized, and of course it was all in a mod 24, like a 24-spoke wheel. If you look at most of the patents related to Nikola Tesla's work, it was all also on mod 24, identically. Now, this shape of the Templar cross also happens to match up with the exact shape of a photon of light, which if you can just Google photon of light, it comes out exactly like the Templar cross, or often referred to as the Maltese cross. Now, back to the Vitruvian man for just a moment. So I noticed something very unique about these proportions. If I took a circle that Da Vinci drew and I intersected right at the top and took it down to the base of the square, I had this very unique kind of triangle, this right triangle, which gave me some pretty cool numbers. The base of which, of an isosceles for both right triangles, is 7.2, the height's 8.64, and the hypotenuse is 9.36. There's 369. And radius, of course, matching 4.32. So I decided to look at this a little bit further just to see, because I got triggered on this notion of the infinite product and the infinite sum. And what's the infinite product and the infinite sum? Well, the infinite product and the infinite sum is related to mathematical, progressions of numerical sort of equations that just continue on infinitely. And the infinite sum is believed to be -1/12, and the infinite product is believed to be the square root of tau, right, or 2 pi. And the infinite difference is also part of this, or what we call the infinite delta. So this is kind of interesting because it's also matching up with the measurements related to a circle and the fact that 1 meter in length of a radius of a circle. So let's assume this is 1 meter right here. 1 meter radius up to here would create a pendulum that would swing, and I had to do it down here, but it's supposed to be right here because I just ran out of space. But it would create a pendulum that would swing and take exactly 1 second to traverse 30 degrees of arc. And the amount of space that it would traverse of that arc would be 0.5236 of a meter, or pi/6 of a meter. That also happens to be exactly 1.718 feet, which is the same as the Euler number -1, and also the Royal Egyptian cubit. So you got 1 meter as radius, and it's creating the swing of an arc for exactly 1 second, both directions, for each direction. And it's traversing in 1/12 of that entire circle, exactly the Royal Egyptian cubit. What? How's that even possible? And of course, then we realize that all of this is interrelated. The cubit, the foot, the meter, even 6 feet. So, and what is the number of meters? If we have a 1 meter radius, we're going to have 6.283, or pi times 2, as the circumference of the circle. How many feet is that? Well, it's 20.616 feet. Doesn't that exactly match the number of inches in a Royal Egyptian cubit? 20.616 inches to a Royal Egyptian cubit? That's kind of funny how all of it matches up so perfectly. And then you've got Royal Egyptian cubit diameter coming out to 3.8196, which is exactly 10 minus phi times 10, phi being 6.18033987. Also interesting that comes out of this is the ratio 24 and 26. I mentioned earlier that in the Shakespeare Code, 624 was like the most important number. 624 and 426. Well, it just so happens that the infinite sum, right, and the infinite delta relate very directly to this. And here's how. One of the things that I discovered was how to factor semi-prime numbers using triangles, using right triangles. So after I discovered the means of being able to predict primes infinitely, then I figured out that actually factors are embedded into triangles. And you'll see another picture of this pretty soon, which basically shows that these two sides together are the sum of x and y. The height is going to be it will be either the product, depends on how far apart the numbers are, but either it will be the product square rooted of x and y, or it will be y minus x divided by 2. And if they're prime numbers, it'll always create a balance because one of the numbers will be irrational. So this side will be irrational in this case. This side will be a whole number, and this side will be a whole number. Well, irrationality also means neutral charge because you can't derive it to a digital root value. And this value will either be even or odd, and this will be opposite of whatever the hypotenuse is. So that means you have perfect polarity balance when you use prime numbers to create other numbers. Well, you can look this up on Numberphile on YouTube. But an infinite product is this value right here, the square root of tau, or another way to represent tau is 2 pi. The infinite sum comes out to negative 1/12. How the heck is that possible? How can you add all numbers, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus every other number into infinity, and it comes out to negative 1/12? Look it up. They give you an actual mathematical proof that this is the correct answer. And I know that it is. Believe me, I was very skeptical. And there are mathematicians who have tried to do debunkings of this work that was done by Ramanujan, the Indian mathematician, one of the greatest mathematicians of all time. And the people that I saw do it, this one guy named Mathologer, who's like this German mathematician, he did a debunking of it. Then he ended up putting out another video afterwards, debunking his own debunking and reversing entirely his position on it. So 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6 equals the square root of 2 pi. That's kind of funny. So then I thought, well, let me go ahead and put these onto a right triangle. Let's see what it makes for a right triangle. Why not? So I took the infinite sum, which would be the hypotenuse value, the infinite product, which is going to be here in this case, the base value, and the infinite delta. So the way you do that is you have to take negative 1/12. So we're now in the imaginary plane, so we can write them back without any polarities at all. So you just end up with 4.166666 and then 3.85415, right, is the infinite delta. And that's just described as the infinite sum divided by 2, right, minus the infinite product squared. So infinite sum divided by 2 squared minus the infinite product squared. So you get these values right here, proportionally. Now, interestingly, this comes out to 1 over 0.24. This comes out to 1 over 0.26 or 0.259. And the base value comes out to 1 over 0.0631. Now, if we just were to look at these and round this value from 259 to 26, you'd have 1 over 24, 1 over 26, and then you could reverse these and make this 24 through their reciprocals. They can do a crisscross like this, 24, 26, and then this value at the base would be 10 or 1. So it could be 2.4 and 2.6 and 1. So the infinite product, infinite sum coming out like this is kind of nuts. I mean, why would this work? And why would we even think to do something like this? Well, here's why. First of all, one thing I noticed was when I factored it, because I can use a method that I discovered to factor it by simply taking this side minus this side, and then taking this side plus this side. So the hypotenuse over hypotenuse plus the height is going to give me one of the factors. And then hypotenuse minus the height is going to give me the other factor. And when I did exactly that, then I ended up with two very interesting numbers. One of them turns out to be factor 1 is 2.4 squared. The other factor is the square root of gravitational constant, 6.674 times 10 to the negative 11th power. That's interesting, because guess what? Special relativity is based exactly on this. You have a right triangle that has rest mass energy and total mass energy and momentum here. And this value right here is going to be the kinetic force. This is all related to E equals mc squared. Now, but what else does this have to do with? Very interestingly, when you look at this 2.59 or 0.259 value, that's matching up with the equinox, the precession of 25,920 years. But we have gravitational changes and momentum shift as we get closer to to Sirius A, our sister star. And as we get closer, we have time dilation effect, and it changes the overall experience of time. The shortest of the cycle becomes 21,600 year short cycle. And then as we get farther away from Sirius A, we go to 25,920 long cycle, right? The long arc of the cycle. And the weighted mean time is 24,000 years. So that's interesting, 24,000 years. And all of this derived just from the infinite product, infinite sum, and infinite difference, which are not intended, or at least I've never seen anywhere that they're intended to be looked at together in one right triangle. But of course, the universe should do it, you would think. So does the sun have a binary star partner in Sirius A? I believe it does. And this is work that I had done on time and how time relates to hypercubes. And even the very expression of an equation of time itself looks kind of like pi here over W plus E minus 1. That's Euler minus 1, W is omega, pi. So another way of looking at this is, again, related to that word emit, or time. And this comes out to giving us exactly 13.81 billion years old. Because pi divided 3.14159 divided by the omega constant plus Euler minus 1, which is the Royal Egyptian cubit, gives us 1.375, which is the golden angle. We then divide that by 360, and we get this ratio 0.381839 plus 1, and we're at 13.81 billion years. And this is how cycles of time repeat upon themselves. It continues to repeat upon itself. So then we have the same thing, infinite product, infinite sum, infinite delta. And the right triangle with proportions that match the divine balance of Leonardo's unique squaring of the circle. So in a very simplified way, 2.6 minus 2.4 equals 0.2. So that's one of the factors. 2.6 plus 2.4 equals 5, which is the other. 0.2 times 5 equals 1. Now, this was interesting because I thought I recognized the shape of that exact dimensional or proportion of that 24 and 26 as matching up with the dollar bill. So this is before and after. And I overlaid it. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And not only was I blown away by that, but I was blown away by the fact that if you look at this line right here, where this square intersects the circle, is sort of begging us to draw another line down, isn't it? To give us the perspective Isn't that funny? Not only do we have the perfect proportions of the eye of providence that's on the dollar bill, we also have it match the depth perspective as well, right inside of the Vitruvian man. Now, who made the dollar bill? George Washington himself. He designed the dollar bill himself, which is kind of funny because I was talking with Billy today, and Billy said that he's got a cryptocurrency that he's going to be doing, and he's going to put his own face on it. So kind of like George Washington. Squaring the circle without measurement, is that even possible? I had a meeting yesterday with a guy who is the head of IEEE around the world, which is the engineering organization with over 500,000 members. And he's a Greek mathematician. And so I shared with him how to square the circle. And he was so skeptical at the beginning, but by the end of it, he said, wow, I have met today the person who has squared the circle successfully. He was really kind of gobsmacked by it. Is it possible to do or not without measurement? Well, the answer is yes. You start with this simple cross. You put a circle around it. You only use a compass and a square with no markings of measurement on it. And this is all possible doing what I just showed so far. The third step is to put a square around that, also possible, and then put diagonals across that square. You don't need to measure anything so far. The third step is to intersect this diagonal line from the middle here through this point to here. Now, this is going to inform the base of the square that Da Vinci used. So the next step is we're going to add lines from the upper right and upper left corners down to the center. And this will inform where the squares could possibly be for their corners, right? Again, I don't need any measurements to do that. It's already there. Now I'm going to place the Da Vinci square. So I start by going at the base here. I match the bases here, and I just draw a straight line up until it intersects this line right here. And I do that on both sides. So now this is the Da Vinci square. Then the next thing I do is I'm going to draw diagonal lines across that square, just like this. Now, this is a 6,000-year-old problem that is now solved. So I'm going to draw diagonal lines from the top here, right, through this point here and through this point here. Again, I require no measurements to do so. Then I'm going to draw a line from here to where the square and the circle intersect on the bottom side over here. So right at this point right here. Okay, and it will crisscross right at the center. I do it on both sides. Then notice where this line intersects and this line intersects right here. At these points, I'm now going to draw a square. So I just start right here and draw a straight line down. I draw a straight line down and I crisscross it right to that intersection point. So I've got my 4 points of my square that I need to finish the square. And now for the coup de grace. I find the point where the diagonal line here is intersecting the circle, right at that point on both sides. And I know that the corners of the square have to be along this line and can be no other place. So I'm going to draw a line now intersecting this point, and then keep drawing it until it exactly hits this line right here on both sides, just like that. And now the task of measuring it. Well, what do we have? Because Da Vinci gave us the middle square, and by the way, it's a very special square indeed, because he never squared the circle. It's not the same value. The area of the circle, if we use a unit value of 1 for its radius, will be pi, right? In this case, I used 10 because it was centimeters. I did this measurement on GeoGebra. It gives me a circle area of 314.15926,535,89,79326. That's exactly pi times 100. So I have pi times 100 as the circle area, and I have pi times 100 as the square area. to 17 decimal digits of accuracy. And you can see it's perfectly matching up with this intersecting line here and this line coming down here on both sides. I use no measurements for whatsoever. What about perimeter matching the circumference of the circle, the perimeter of the square? So the perimeter of this square is 15.707963326. And of course, it's matching up exactly where this gray line was intersecting this line. And this is now giving us exactly tau, or 2 pi divided by 4. So it's a perfect match. The perimeter then is 2 pi, matching the circumference of 2 pi. Of course, you can't match the circumference and match the area in the same square versus the circle. But what was it that Da Vinci did? Well, Da Vinci drew a square that happened to be exactly not pi and not 2 pi. He drew something in between, but happens to be exactly the Euler number to 17 decimal digits of accuracy. The area of the square on Da Vinci's drawing is the Euler number, a transcendental irrational number that, by the way, through a scalar conversion, is the balancing of pi. So the mathematicians that laughed at the way Da Vinci drew it, although it might be beautiful, and said it's nowhere close, were just playing checkers when he was playing chess. He knew the Euler number and encrypted it in the most famous piece of art in the world 200 plus years prior to Isaac Newton and his purported discovery of it. So now we're coming close to a close here. Why does the pyramid have 8 sides? Nobody's seen this at all. As you notice, the pyramid has a very, very slight indentation on all 4 of its sides, giving it actually 8 sides. So I thought, let me see what happens if I take this infinite product, infinite sum, infinite delta triangle, and I just repeat it in quaternion symmetry. So I'll draw it like this. Within a circle, I'll use the hypotenuse as my diameter of the circle, because using Thales' theorem, I can use any right triangle that will inscribe within that. But this is exactly the proportions, giving me a 67-degree beta value and a 23.22 degree theta value, which is the small, more acute angle. So then I mirror it in mirror symmetry, just like this. And now I have a rectangle. And I mirror it again 4 times. And look what I get. This looks familiar. Wait a minute. This was just the infinite product, infinite sum, infinite delta values that I use in factorization, and looking at those values from the context of maybe the universe would make a structure out of that proportionality. Well, it turns out it informs exactly the Templar cross again. Here we have a Maltese cross. And if I do it, continue it for octonian mirror reflections, then I get a perfect mod 24, which is where I found the prime number pattern in the first place. A perfect mod 24. Now remember that every prime number above 3 will have a square value that will be exactly a multiple of 24 plus 1, without exception. So that's interesting because it speaks to some fundamental nature of 24 and its reciprocal of 42, which happens to be one of the only numbers. There's only 3 that do this: 137 and 73, 24 and 42, and 57.1 and 175 are numbers that have very, very close proximity between their reciprocal value and their palindromic value. So is the pyramid trying to tell us something about mod 24? Is it a coincidence that I discovered the quasi-prime numbers on mod 24 a week after I was in the Great Pyramid and spent 5 hours laying in the sarcophagus? So the Great Pyramid geometry of infinite product, infinite sum, infinite difference is exactly forming a mod 24 and showing us the prime number pattern. Now, something else is unique about this though, because what has this got to do with this indentation right here? Well, turns out that when you take this line of your square and you draw it to intersect where this mod 24 line actually intersects here, the outer square, and you take a ruler and match it up to here, it will cause a very minute indentation here, which guess what? Turns out to be exactly 0.432 degrees. Seriously, Robert? 0.432 degrees indentation here on all four sides. That's a very tiny indentation. Well, that's exactly what it is. So you see this now with 0.432 indentation on all four sides. Now, if we multiply that by 756 feet, which is the base width of the Great Pyramid, it comes out to be exactly 3.27 feet. Now, is that a coincidence that it happens to be 99.7% of exactly 1 meter indentation? Is the Great Pyramid encoding advanced knowledge of the prime number pattern? And the notion that the entire universe is built on right triangles, that we can now look at each of the cycles that we go through life in a very different way as being both musical, mathematical, geometric, physical, and all of them are actually just singing the same song. And we have separated them into different zones of perception. It comes back to this. All triangles are the resulting relationship of X and Y. For any given X and Y, and this is a discovery I made not very long ago, X and Y summed, so X plus Y is giving us the two side slopes, also of the pyramid. The base is giving us Y minus X, and the height is giving us the square root of the product, X times Y square rooted. Our entire world is built on our lack of knowledge of this mathematics. All our encryptions in the world are built on our lack of knowledge of this exact geometric relationship, which I guarantee you, if you look this up anywhere, and you can try it for yourself, but I guarantee you will find it nowhere because it's not anywhere in academia. And we've looked, because we put it as a subject of one of our new papers called the sum product conjecture. For many, many years, mathematicians have been looking for the relationship between the sum of two integers and the product of the same two integers. How could 5 and 7 add to 12? And how does 12 then relate to 35 when you multiply 5 and 7? Does 12 and 35 have some geometric relationship? And the answer is yes, they do, through this exact thing. It's the sum divided by 2 is the hypotenuse, and the product, 35 square root, is the height. It's fixed. And the base will always be, if it's half this isosceles triangle, so it would be a right triangle, will always be X or Y minus X divided by 2. The distance or difference divided by 2, the mean difference. So another way of saying this would be the square root of the product is the geometric mean. Half of the sum is the arithmetic mean, and the differential mean is the base. And every triangle has this embedded in it. This means that literally every triangle contains all of its parentage information, because now we can factor it all the way back up. It's basically a compression or a compressed blockchain of origin. Every single triangle. And of course, every right triangle can be broken again into more right triangles. It's the perfect fractalization form. And I believe this is part of what the Great Pyramid's trying to tell us as well. The simplest geometric form for infinite fractalization is the right triangle. So what if we put it in quaternion symmetry, just like I did with Salvator Mundi? So you've got an X and Y axis. You've got a quadrant that is real because all the numbers are positive. Then you've got 3 quadrants that are imaginary because some of the numbers are negative. And so the y-axis is giving us a polarity and the x-axis is giving us another polarity. The object is the x-axis. The y-axis is going to be the background. And again, it's male and female, isn't it? X and Y, just like chromosomes. So starting from one thought, which is the sum, product, and difference of X and Y, the parents, the input values. We start on the right side of this circle with 0 degrees next to it with mathematics, where we have ratios, quantitative ratios, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 3 to 7. These are just X, Y coordinates. Then it moves into away from this first dimension, which has X, Y coordinates. And actually you could say, well, wait, that's 2 dimensions, Robert. Well, no, it's not, because actually each one of these lines is just the same line in mirror polarity. We don't add them together yet, so they're literally just the same line. It's the same type line in mirrored polarity. One is the Y coordinate, the other is the X coordinate. And just by shifting it 90 degrees gives this polarity shift. The second dimension is taking that concept of abstraction and ratio into art, forming proportion and area. And we've got now a negative object and a positive backdrop. Then we put solidity to this. We want it to have mass. We want this idea or thought in quaternity to take on form and to be solid. It needs resonance and gravity and depth and volume. So now we have a negative form for the object and we have a negative backdrop in the third dimension. And then we get to the dimension we're in, that we're experiencing, which is the fourth dimension. We have space as a backdrop of blackness, the negative space. And the objects are positive. We now, at the third dimension, also have a z-axis that has now come in. And these right triangles, which are from all geometric forms, can be broken into exclusively right triangles infinitely. And all musical intervals and chords and keys are all right triangles, again, exclusively. And the gravitational inverse square law and the radiative inverse square law are exactly the same right triangles. But wait, what about all matter, mass, electricity, magnetism, radiation, light, time, and gravity and darkness? These are all right triangles, expressing electricity in its opposite time and mass in its opposite polarity, magnetism. Radiation giving birth to photon and gravitation giving birth to mass carrying phonon. And then spirality. All motions spin, logarithmic spirals. Base values are determined simply by hypotenuse over height. These are rotating right triangles for every given polygonal geometry, fractaling universally. Now we have a unified theory. The right triangle is the geometric unity. And it is the sum, product, and difference. And I would almost call the sum the omnipotent, the product the omnipresence, and the difference the omniscience, or the wisdom to know the difference. All periodic elements also follow this same periodicity in motion and spirality. It is very simple and it is very beautiful. So we live in this world, we're just like an iceberg, where we only perceive what is on top of the water. We don't think about ourselves beneath the water, the subconscious mind. We experience duality. We judge all the things that we don't like about ourselves and everyone else that we encounter. We will continue to attract everything that we judge until we no longer judge everything that we attract. Now, however, is the end of this duality. It's the end of judgment of others and self. It's recognizing that you are good enough and that we ourselves are the only ones to blame, if there's any blame to be given, for the obstacles that we face, because we continue to imagine those obstacles, and only those obstacles that we allow ourselves to imagine become real and get the solidity and gravitation behind them to create mass and true obstacle. So here's the good, here's the bad, Here's the bad and the good, and here's the good and the bad, and this is life. But actually, everything is one. It's only our perception that creates the polarity. Now, finish up on this, the water bearer. The icosahedron is the quintessential hexapentagon, and it is the platonic structure of water. The mem. Aleph, mem, tav, emet, time. In time and with water, everything changes. We are on that precipice of change right now. The age of Aquarius. The heart-brain consciousness. When the heart thinks and the mind feels, the river of wisdom flows. We have decided up until now that it was best for our consciousness to experience polarity in extreme forms. And it's not through the lightning of polarity that we actually wake up from the polarity. We wake up from the polarity because we are smacked in the face with the polarity, as we have all been this past year. But it is time now to seek the balance of the feminine, art, the microcosm, music, emotionality, and to merge it with the logos, logic, masculine thought, science, macrocosm, and materiality. It is time to merge together around the eye of Ra and the eye of Thoth, or thought. Thought, as in we think. And we all had our eyes open in 2020. We all got 2020 vision, and clarity was brought into our consciousness. But now it's time for us all to grow and ascend. It's time for us to embody the philosopher's stone, the heart-brain consciousness. And now return to Earth of Thoth, also known as Metatron. The mystery of Alpha, the 33rd prime number, 137 over 1 and 1 over 137. It's one of the greatest damn mysteries of physics, a magic number that comes to us with no understanding by man. You might say the hand of God wrote that number, and we don't know how he pushed his pencil. Richard Feynman, one of the greatest physicists of all time. The Tetragrammaton, Yahweh, Yod He Vav He. Is this a name or is it a math equation? Pi to the 7th divided by, pi times 7 divided by pi to the 7th equals 1 over 137. Or alpha. The alpha omega and Thoth is just the divine balance achieved by the merger of opposites, the bringing together of polarities, understanding the complementarity, the shadow work that is all required, and experiencing a new experience that is the embodiment of both alpha and omega. And in fact, you could also just look at the omega symbol, and just like the coordinate lines on Cartesian planes, flip it 90 degrees to the left, and you have a lowercase letter a. Thank you very much, everyone. And that is the end of my presentation.